Okay, so diving right in, we're tackling your research review on ADPKD today. And let me tell you, even the title really caught my eye. Trigger warning, how modern diet, lifestyle, and environment pull the trigger on autosomal-dominant polycystic kidney disease progression.
It's like seeing a trigger warning in a scientific paper. Talk about a hook.
Definitely a bold move. You know, they're really shaking things up in this paper by challenging the idea that ADPKD is like all about your genes, right? They're saying, yeah, okay, your genes, they kind of lay the groundwork for sure. But it's the things in your everyday life, the what they're calling the triggers, that really make the difference, that really dictate how fast this disease actually progresses.
So it's less like a genetic life sentence and more like, what, a recipe where your genes are just one ingredient?
Exactly. They're saying you might have a predisposition, but then it's the combination of those genes with like everything else, your diet, your lifestyle, the environment you're living in, all of that determines the final outcome. Okay, I'm hooked already. Let's talk about these triggers. Where do they even begin?
A really big one that they emphasize is carbohydrates. Specifically, how the typical Western diet, loaded with refined carbs and sugars, that can be a major trigger for ADPKD progression.
Yeah, we hear a lot about processed foods being unhealthy in general, but how does that specifically impact ADPKD? I mean, what's the connection there?
They point out that essentially this overloaded carbs, especially all the refined sugars we're consuming, it leads to chronically high blood sugar. And that's bad news for anyone, obviously, but it's especially problematic for kidneys that are already struggling with ADPKD. In fact, they actually found that even in, just in people with ADPKD, having type 2 diabetes was linked to the disease progressing much faster.
So it's not just about sugar being like generally bad for you, it directly impacts how quickly ADPKD progresses. Really makes you think twice about that extra soda, huh?
Exactly. And it's not even just the sugar itself, right? It's the whole chain reaction that it sets off in the body when you consume that much sugar. High insulin levels, for example, are linked to hypertension, right? High blood pressure, which puts even more stress on those vulnerable kidneys.
So it's like a domino effect with sugar tipping over that first piece and then boom. And they called out fructose as a particularly bad offender, which actually surprised me. I mean, I usually think of fruit as being healthy.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Like a little bit of fructose from, eating whole fruits, that's probably not a big deal at all. The problem is the sheer amount of fructose we're getting these days, mostly from these added sugars, right?
Hmm.
It's just off the charts compared to what our bodies are, like, designed to handle.
So what makes fructose so much worse than the other types of sugars?
Well, for one thing, just the way fructose breaks down in the body, it actually increases uric acid production.
Uric acid, isn't that what causes gout?
You got it. And high uric acid levels also make it easier for those really painful uric acid kidney stones to form. And if that wasn't bad enough, fructose also,
Okay, I'm getting the message loud and clear. Dish the fructose. But what about, like, other carbohydrates? Did they suggest going totally carb-free?
not totally carb-free, no. But they did make a really strong case for something called, let me see if I can get this right. It's called ketogenic metabolic therapy, or KMT.
KMT. I've heard of the keto diet, of course, but how does that tie into managing ADPKD?
So a keto diet, just as a reminder for our listener, it's very low in carbs and high in healthy fats. This basically forces your body to, like, switch gears and start burning fat for energy instead of glucose, which is what it usually does. And this process produces these things called ketones.
So it's like flipping a metabolic switch, essentially. But how does that actually help with ADPKD?
That's where it gets really interesting. See, they believe that the ketone bodies themselves, especially one called beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB,
Yeah.
they think those might directly protect the kidneys from damage.
So it's not just about what you're not eating on this diet, but what you are eating, right? Like,
Mm.
BHB is the good guy here.
That's the idea. Studies have shown that BHB can influence a lot of different cellular processes, including something called mTOR signaling. Now, this pathway is really important because it controls how cells grow and multiply. And in ADPKD, it's often stuck in overdrive, which is what leads to all those excess cysts forming.
Okay, so too much mTOR signaling equals too many cysts. Got it.
Exactly. And what they're finding is that BHB seems to be able to, like, dial down this overactive mTOR signaling. So it's potentially slowing down the progression of the disease by calming everything down.
Okay, so less sugar, more BHB. I'm taking notes. What else did they find?
Well, they also they went into this fascinating link between what you eat and something called microcrystals, which can form in the kidneys.
Microcrystals. Okay, that honestly sounds a little scary. What are we talking about here?
So think of them like these tiny little crystals.
Mhm.
It's often made of things like calcium oxalate. And these crystals, they can actually form inside your kidneys. And here's the kicker. These microcrystals can actually cause these teeny tiny little injuries inside your kidneys.
Ouch. Okay, so definitely not something you want forming in your body.
Definitely not. And what's even more fascinating is that in people who already have ADPKD, these tiny injuries from microcrystals, they can actually trigger the formation of even more cysts.
So it's like each little injury creates like a new opportunity for a cyst to form.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they link this back to diet, especially consuming a lot of oxalates, which, just so you know, are found in a lot of common foods, like spinach, almonds, even some teas.
Wait, spinach. So now I have to worry about sugar A&D, my healthy green smoothies? This feels like a lot to keep track of.
I hear you. It can definitely feel overwhelming. Look, they're not saying to avoid these foods entirely, just to be mindful, I guess. For example, if you're having something high in oxalate, try pairing it with something that's calcium rich, because calcium can actually bind to oxalate in your gut, which reduces how much of it gets absorbed into your bloodstream.
So adding like some yogurt to that spinach smoothie might offset the oxalate. That makes me feel a bit better.
It's all about balance, and understanding how different dietary components interact, even seemingly healthy ones. Speaking of which, they also brought up phosphate in this paper, which is often added to processed foods, by the way. And it turns out that's another culprit that can lead to those pesky microcrystal formations.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Too much of certain things, even seemingly healthy ones, can really impact ADPKD. It's almost like walking a tightrope sometimes, trying to find that balance.
That's a great analogy. And this just highlights how crucial it is to really be informed about what we're putting into our bodies.
Absolutely. This deep dive is already packed with information. We've got fructose, BHB, microcrystals. I'm definitely reevaluating my grocery list after this. What other surprises did they uncover in their research?
Well, they didn't stop at just diet. They also dug into dehydration and the effects of certain medications. And even, get this, environmental toxins.
Environmental toxins. Now, that sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory to me.
I know, right? It sounds kind of scary. But just think, like heavy metals, pesticides, all those chemicals and plastics, those can all build up in your body over time and put extra stress on your kidneys, which, as we've been discussing, is the last thing you want when you have ADPKD.
Okay, so it's not just what we're eating and drinking, but also what we're exposed to every day in our environment that could be a factor in ADPKD. We've got a lot more to unpack here, and I definitely want to talk more about these environmental toxins. That's a whole other can of worms.
It is. But I think we should save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back. You ready to dive back into this ADPKD research?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's still so much more to unpack here. It's kind of amazing.
Last time we really got into how impactful something as simple as like what you eat every day, your diet can be for you, especially with ADPKD. Particularly like the dangers of too many carbs and sugar really stood out to me. It really made me rethink my assumptions about what healthy eating even really means for someone with this condition.
And that's exactly what makes this research so compelling, I think. It's all about challenging those old assumptions and really empowering you with knowledge so you can make the best decisions for yourself.
You mentioned before the break that we were going to get into environmental toxins, which I have to say, it sounds a bit intense, but I'm also kind of intrigued. Where do we even begin with something as broad as like toxins?
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming for sure, even just thinking about it. But think of it this way. Every single day, just going about our lives, we're encountering this mix of things like heavy metals, pesticides, all those like chemicals, especially the ones they're finding in plastics now.
Yeah.
And they can all impact ADPKD.
Okay, so it's not like there's one big bad toxin out there that we need to avoid, but rather this constant exposure to a mix of these things that can add up over time.
Exactly. And even small amounts of these things, if you're exposed regularly enough, they can build up in your system over time, and that puts extra stress on your body. And in your kidneys in particular, which is, not what you want when you have ADPKD.
So it's kind of like, what's that phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. Each exposure might seem insignificant on its own, but together they add up to a much bigger problem.
That's a great way to put it. And, since ADPKD already makes your kidneys work so much harder than they should have to, it's even more crucial to try to minimize that, what they call that toxic burden, as much as you can.
Okay, that makes sense. But I mean, realistically, how much can we really control when it comes to our environment?
I hear you. It can definitely feel like daunting at times. But this research actually, it offers some practical steps that you can take. For example, like just choosing organic produce whenever possible. That's a great place to start. A really easy change you can make today.
That makes sense. Fewer pesticides right there, so that's a win-win.
Exactly. And filtering your water is another, simple but really powerful change you can make. Even the water that's coming out of our taps, unfortunately. That can contain trace amounts of heavy metals and other contaminants that you really don't want to be drinking.
You know what? I'll admit I've been really bad about changing my water filter lately. Adding that to my to-do list as soon as we're done recording this. But what about things like air pollution? I live in a city, so it's not like I can just hold my breath every time I walk outside.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, air pollution it's a huge growing concern, really. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that we don't have as much individual control over.
Yeah.
But, that's not to say there's nothing you can do, like being aware of air quality alerts, maybe planning, your outdoor activities for days when the air is a little bit cleaner. Those little things can actually make a difference.
So it's kind of about picking your battles, I guess, and focusing on the things you can control in your own little world.
Exactly. Every little bit helps. And speaking of things we can control, can I circle back to medications for a second? Because this research really, it raised some red flags there for me, especially when it comes to uh, painkillers.
Yeah. Yeah, they mentioned NSAIDs specifically, right? And I know a lot of people with ADPKD, they deal with pain, so that definitely caught my attention. What's the deal with these common pain relievers? I mean, they're available over the counter, so it's easy to think of them as harmless.
Right, exactly. Well, it turns out that NSAIDs, these are things like ibuprofen and naproxen, they can actually reduce blood flow to the kidneys, which is not good.
And less blood flow, that means those kidneys aren't getting the oxygen and nutrients they need to function properly.
Exactly. And over time, especially in kidneys that are, already kind of stressed out from dealing with ADPKD, that reduced blood flow can really contribute to even more damage, which just makes the problem worse.
So it's like this vicious cycle almost. Like the pain might lead you to take these NSAID medications, but those very medications could be contributing to the problem, making the underlying issue even worse in the long run.
Exactly. And again, it highlights how incredibly important it is to talk to your doctor, about any kind of pain that you're experiencing. There might be safer alternatives out there that they can recommend, or even, ways to manage your pain that don't involve medication at all.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even those over-the-counter medications, they're not without risks, especially when we're talking about something as serious as ADPKD. Were there any other medications that they flagged as potentially problematic for people with ADPKD?
They also touch on antibiotics,
Hmm.
which, obviously they're crucial for fighting off infections. I don't think we want to give people the wrong idea there. But for someone with ADPKD, especially if their kidney function is, already somewhat compromised,
Yeah.
even just, a standard course of antibiotics can actually be risky.
How so? What makes them so risky in this situation?
So if your kidneys aren't, they're not filtering the way they should be, all those waste products out of your blood, those antibiotics can actually build up in your system to potentially dangerous levels.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's even more crucial for people with ADPKD to try to avoid infections in the first place, since fighting them off can be even trickier.
Definitely. It all comes back to like, taking a proactive approach with your health, washing your hands frequently, avoiding close contact with anyone who's sick. All those things our mothers taught us when we were kids.
It's funny how those really basic, simple habits, they become even more important when you're dealing with a chronic condition like ADPKD.
Absolutely. It's all about being mindful and making choices that support your overall health, day in and day out.
Mm. We've talked a lot about what to avoid so far, like all that sugar, certain medications, environmental toxins. But were there any good guys in this research, so to speak? Anything you can actually add to your life that might help protect your kidneys if you have ADPKD?
You mean besides those delicious BHB molecules we were talking about earlier?
Huh. Touche. But yeah, aside from tweaking your diet, was there anything else they found to be beneficial?
They did go into the importance of electrolytes. particularly maintaining a kind of a good balance between sodium and potassium in your diet.
Okay, electrolytes. That honestly makes me think of like sports drinks and, replenishing after a tough workout. What's the connection to ADPKD there?
It's actually pretty fascinating. You see typical Western diets, the standard American diet, they're often very, very high in sodium and at the same time relatively low in potassium.
Okay, so it's not just about like limiting salt then, but also actively adding in those potassium-rich foods to kind of balance things out.
Exactly. And the reason the balance is so important is that potassium, it actually helps to kind of counteract some of the negative effects of all that sodium we're consuming.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, for one thing, potassium helps your body get rid of excess sodium, flush it out,
Uh-huh.
which can then help to lower your blood pressure.
And we already talked about how dangerous high blood pressure can be for anyone with ADPKD, so that's a big deal.
Exactly. So maintaining that delicate balance between those two minerals, sodium and potassium, it's absolutely crucial.
This is making me wonder, like, if all those low sodium processed foods are really doing us any favors, because if they're also low in potassium, it sounds like we're just trading one problem for another.
That's a great point. And it really highlights how important it is to focus on, whole unprocessed foods whenever possible. Nature tends to do a better job of balancing things out than we do when we start messing around with things in a lab.
This has been such a roller coaster of information. We've covered so much ground. It's amazing, from fructose to like pesticides to potassium. I mean, wow, it's a lot to digest. What other surprises did this research have in store for us?
Well, they saved one of the most, I'll say one of the most intriguing connections for last. The link between ADPKD and gut health.
Wait, gut health. Like, you're saying what I eat, it doesn't just impact my kidneys, but it also impacts my gut.
That's what they're finding, yeah.
Right.
There seems to be a really strong connection there. They even use the term leaky gut in this paper, which might sound a little, I don't know, a little strange maybe. But it's actually this growing area of research in a lot of different chronic diseases.
Okay, I'm all ears. Teach me something new. Break down this whole leaky gut thing for me.
Okay, so you know how your gut is basically just this long tube, right? And it's responsible for digesting all the food you eat, absorbing all those nutrients your body needs.
Right, right. High school biology, I kind of remember that.
Perfect. Well, imagine the lining of that tube, that intestinal wall. It's like a really tightly woven fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? When you have leaky gut, that fabric essentially becomes more porous, so it's like it gets little holes in it, and that allows things to pass through that shouldn't be passing through.
So like what? Like food particles are escaping before they've been fully digested? Is that what's leaking out?
That can happen, yeah. But even more concerning, things like toxins that are produced by the bacteria in your gut, they can actually slip through those gaps as well.
And those toxins, they end up in the bloodstream and can like travel to other parts of the body, including the kidneys.
Exactly. And once those toxins are circulating throughout your body, they can actually trigger inflammation and damage.
Yeah.
Which, as we keep saying, is especially bad news for kidneys that are already struggling with ADPKD.
Okay, yeah. That leaky gut analogy, it's starting to make sense to me now, and it's it's not pretty. What causes this leakiness in the first place?
That's where they get really interesting, and it actually ties back into a lot of what we've already talked about today. Essentially, what they're finding is that a lot of the same things that are really harmful to your kidneys, they're also detrimental to your gut health, which is why this connection is so important.
Like what? Give me the rundown.
Okay, so high sugar intake is a huge one, really big culprit. Processed foods, those usual suspects, they're also really problematic. Even stress, believe it or not, even stress can mess with your gut microbiome, which is that delicate balance of all the bacteria, the good and the bad bacteria that live in your intestines.
So it's not just what you're putting in your body, but also how you're living your life that can impact your gut.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, some medications, like those antibiotics we were just talking about, they're sometimes necessary, but they can also disrupt that balance of good bacteria in your gut.
So it's like this domino effect again. Those antibiotics, they might be necessary at the time to fight off an infection, but they can also throw your gut out of whack, potentially leading to leaky gut and then, a whole bunch of other problems down the road.
Exactly. It really just highlights, again, how interconnected all these systems in our bodies are.
So with all that said, with all those risk factors, what can you actually do to heal a quote unquote leaky gut? Are you just are you stuck with it once it's happened?
That's that's the good news, really. The good news is that there are definitely things you can do to support your gut health and help it repair itself. And it starts with a lot of those same lifestyle changes we've already been discussing today. Reducing sugar, cleaning up your diet, really focusing on whole foods, managing stress, all of that plays a role.
So those changes, they aren't just good for your kidneys then, they're really good for your whole body, which makes sense, but it's always good to be reminded.
Absolutely. It's about, again, taking that holistic approach to your health, really seeing the body as this interconnected system. And and I will say, for some people, in addition to those lifestyle changes, some additional support might be helpful.
Like what kind of support are we talking about here?
Well, they mentioned things like probiotics and prebiotics, which can help kind of restore that healthy balance of bacteria in the gut.
Okay, so probiotics, those are like the yogurt drinks and stuff, right? And prebiotics, that's like the fuel that the good bacteria need to flourish.
You got it. But one word of caution: it's really important to do your research and choose high quality supplements if you do decide to go that route.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation, and honestly, I can't believe we've only scratched the surface of this research. We've covered dietary triggers, the impact of everyday toxins, the importance of electrolytes and gut health. I mean, it's a lot. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, any last nuggets of wisdom that you took away from this research that you want to leave our listeners with?
Beyond all the specific, dietary recommendations and things like that, what really struck me most about this research was just the overall message of empowerment, you know? Like, yes, ADPKD is a complex condition, it's serious, but this research really shows that you're not powerless. You're not just a victim to your genes.
It's not just about inheriting a gene and then just kind of waiting to see what happens, right? You can actually take steps to influence the course of your disease.
Exactly. It's about being informed, advocating for yourself, and really working in partnership with your healthcare provider to make the best choices for your individual needs.
It's a message of hope, really, which I think is so important when we're talking about any chronic condition, but especially something as serious as ADPKD.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and I think that the research really, it gives you a lot to work with.
Okay, so we've covered a truly mind-blowing amount of information in this deep dive. We talked about dietary triggers, environmental toxins, medications, that whole gut-kidney connection. And I can't believe I almost forgot, we still need to talk about protein. They actually challenged the traditional advice of restricting protein for people with kidney disease, which seemed, honestly, kind of radical to me. Are you ready to unpack that?
Let's do it. That's a whole other can of worms, and we'll definitely tackle it head on in the final part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Ready to finish this thing up.
I'm ready. Let's do it. We've gone, like, full-on deep dive mode in this episode. It's kind of amazing. We've covered so much ground already. Hidden sugars, leaky guts, you name it. It's hard to believe there's more, but this research paper, it saved one of its biggest curveballs for last, and that's saying something. We got to talk about protein.
Yeah, this is a big one. They really go all in on this debate that's been, kind of simmering in the medical community for a while. Like, is a high-protein diet, is it good or bad for your kidneys? And that question is especially important for people who already have ADPK2.
Totally, because, I swear my entire life I've just heard that too much protein is bad for your kidneys, period, end of story. Like, it's just this given.
It is a really, really common belief, for sure. One that, honestly, like, I held on to for a long time myself, I'll admit. But this research, it challenges that so directly, and they have studies to back it up, studies that show there's not a clear connection between eating a lot of protein and ADPKD getting worse faster. Seriously, so all those years of people with kidney issues being told to, like, avoid red meat and stuff, that might have been misguided this whole time.
Well, it's definitely up for debate. Like, I don't think the science is totally settled on this yet. But, this research, it points out something that I thought was really interesting. They basically argue that, if you look way back, like, our ancestors, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they probably ate way more protein than we do now, and they didn't seem to have these crazy high rates of kidney disease that we're seeing today.
So, like, our caveman ancestors were, like, walking protein shakes, basically, and their kidneys were fine. That's kind of wild.
Right. It really makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
They basically suggest that maybe, just maybe, it's our modern diet, the one that's so heavy on those refined carbs and sugars that we've been talking about, maybe that's more to blame for all these kidney problems than protein ever was.
Okay, that really throws a wrench in everything I thought I knew about this. But I guess my question is like, if protein isn't the bad guy here, then what's the takeaway for someone listening to this who has ADPKD? Can I like just go have a steak every night now?
Okay, hold on. Let's pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah.
It's it's still all about balance, and honestly, the most important thing is to work with your doctor, with your healthcare team, to figure out like what's the right amount of protein for you, because every case is different, and there are a lot of factors to consider.
Fair enough. Always good to have that disclaimer.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know, after feeling like there are so many things that are off limits when you're trying to manage ADPKD, it's kind of exciting to hear that something like protein, which, gets a bad rap, might actually be like an ally.
Totally, I get that. And when you really think about it, protein is like it's essential, right? Our bodies need it to function. It builds and repairs tissues. It supports a healthy immune system. I mean, it makes sense that it would play a role in supporting kidney health too, right?
Yeah, it's almost like this research is giving us permission to rethink all those old dogmas, you know? To not just blindly accept everything we've been told, but to actually question things, to explore new possibilities, which is what we're all about here on the Deep Dive.
Exactly. And I think, honestly, that's what makes this particular research paper so impactful. It's not just about, here's a list of what to eat and what to avoid, but it's really about empowering you to have, more informed, more productive conversations with the people who are, helping to manage your condition.
I could not agree more. We have covered a seriously mind-blowing amount of information in this deep dive. I mean, we talked about those dietary triggers, environmental toxins, medications, how your gut health is connected to your kidneys, and now this whole protein puzzle. It's a lot if you're listening to this. I mean, your head must be spinning right now.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. But remember, the point isn't to memorize every single thing we talk about. It's more about walking away with a deeper understanding of how interconnected our bodies are, and honestly how much power we all have to influence our health, even when we're dealing with a chronic condition like ADPKD.
Absolutely. This research it's like a call to action in a way. It's saying, hey, you need to be your own health advocate, do your research, don't be afraid to ask questions, and really work in partnership with your healthcare providers to create a plan that's truly tailored to your individual needs.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's been so great diving into all of this with you.
Oh, me too. And to all our listeners out there, just remember, you're not alone on this journey, and knowledge is power. Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.